Hello. In this video, I'm going to show you how to update the version of your firmware or operating system on your DEQX hardware, and also how to see what version you're running. To start with, we're going to go and validate that our hardware is actually running. And in order to do that, I go to the front panel app and I refresh it, and there I see that the DEQX hardware is running because I can see the front panel app. In 1.33a and earlier versions of the operating system, there was no DEQX status app. So if I try to load the DEQX status app, which is going to dexe3.local:4321, nothing will load, even though the system is running. And that's because version 1.33a of the firmware and earlier did not have the DEQX status app. I would like to see version 1.34a of the firmware running on this system. And to do that, I go to the dexe3.local:8080 software updater app. And I refresh my browser, and there it is. Now, I've previously downloaded that firmware, and I'm going to take that download and I'm going to, take that download and I'm going to drop it onto the software update app in this location. So at this point, it's just uploaded that firmware or operating system to the hardware, and the hardware is now installing it. It takes about a minute to update the operating system, and then it takes a small amount of time for the system to boot. So we're waiting for the update process to finish, and now we're waiting for the system to restart. I can hear the relays on the system clicking, which means it's rebooting. And the application has refreshed itself, which means the system's back up, and I can also hear the relays clicking again. So the system has reloaded. I can validate that by refreshing the front panel app. I give it some time to start. Well, that's not loading. I'll try the status. There's the status app. And here I can see that the operating system version is 1.34a, which is what we just loaded in. The firmware revision is 1.08. Now I know that the firmware revision should be 1.18, and I have to fix this problem. However, if I go back to the front panel app, it's now loaded and working. So we know that the firmware revision is incorrect, and what we have to do in this case, and this will be a rare event, we have to use the SD card to update our firmware and our operating system. So in order to do that, I need to open the hardware top, and I need to go and set up the hardware so that it's in a good state for doing it. So when I open the top, I can see this region here of the hardware, and this should be the state of the hardware. If this jumper here is not in this position, correct, and it's in the other position, pull this shunt up or this shorting pin up and move it from here to the position that's closest to the SD card. Once your system is set up like that, you can insert the SD card, which I will do now on my system. I'll first turn my system off, and I'll insert the SD card, and I'll restart my system. So now I've inserted the SD card, my system looks like this. We'll give you some information on how to write the SD card image down to the SD card so that it's ready for use. However, I can now go back to, I'm waiting for the system to boot of the SD card. And once it does, I'll be able to go to the status page and I will be able to see that the firmware and the operating system revision has updated. So I can hear that it's reloaded. I'm going back to the status page, which is dexy3.local:4321, and it reloads, and I can see that the firmware revision is at 1.18. However, this firmware revision is not running on your hardware yet because we have loaded from the SD card. So in order to update the hardware properly, we go back to the software update page, which is dexy3.local:8080. Refresh that. We're waiting for it to load. Okay, so the front panel app is working. The status page is working. I'm wondering why there we are. So it just took a bit of time, but the software updater page is now ready to go. So now this software updater we're actually not running from the hardware itself, but from the SD card. To update the hardware, do the same process again. I load in the same operating system version, 1.34A in this case, and I drop it into there, and the system is now loading that to the memory and writing it to disk. We wait for that to happen. We're still got the SD card in there. The next step, once the system has properly restarted, is to turn off the system, pull the SD card out and reboot. The system's now restarting. I'm waiting for the relays to sound. I can hear the relays have sounded, so the system's shut down. And now I really know that the system's rebooting. At this point, I've waited. I can wait longer until I hear the system restart, and then I turn it off. I'm turning it off now. And I'm pulling out the SD card. Now I've pulled the SD card out and I'm restarting the system. And I'm waiting to hear the relays click and see the web applications reload, or I manually reload them. And then I should be able to validate that the firmware version is on 1.18. So I can hear the relays restarting. I'm going to go to the status page and I'm going to reload that. And I'm going to reload it again just to be sure. So now there's no SD card in and the firmware version has been updated to version 1.18. And this is the most stable firmware version at the moment. And we're running operating system version 1.34A. An interesting thing about the status page is that you can use this page to get us useful information for debugging problems that you're having if it's required, and we'll let you know about that. So that is how you update the firmware on the hardware and the operating system on the hardware. Thank you for watching.